Tottenham have made their attacking addition to the January transfer window. It is Mathys Tel, just on a slightly different day and under slightly different circumstances than we originally expected. It is currently not clear whether Mathys Tel will be joining on a straight loan with an obligation to buy or an option to buy. Reports are conflicting. You may have just read it's a straight option. You may have said it's a straight loan, sorry, but there is now conflicting reports that Mathys Tel can still decide later on through this process if he wants to switch this to a permanent transfer. So those parts are under negotiations, but what we do know is that he will be a Tottenham Hotspur player come the start of the next Premier League fixture, and that he is a very welcome addition to the attacking force. We are now going to take you through an overview with Deej of the player profile, how he fits in, where he's going to go to Spurs in terms of the 11, his strengths and weaknesses, and really dive into that. Please bear in mind, recording this was made with the assumption that he will be made permanent at some point in the next 6 months. If that changes, there's not much I can do. You're just going to have to accept that that recording was done with that in context. But it shouldn't make much difference. We're going into the profile of a player, where he fits into Spurs immediately, and touching on where he might fit in the long term as well. Let's enjoy it. We still might need one more signing this January, but it's a good one, although later than expected. All right, over to you, Deej. 9 starts, lots of substitute appearances. Is that anything to worry about, or is that associated to being a young player? Is this a red flag? What's your kind of general feel about that at the moment?
No, I mean, I think that obviously, if you look at since the start of the 2022-23 season, he's got 12 goals and 6 assists, and those aren't necessarily like the world on fire numbers, but you have to remember last season he played only about 1,000 minutes of football. So when you put that kind of context in it, and that those numbers start to look a little bit better. And the season before that, the 2022-23 season, I think he got another 500. So you can say he got about as many minutes. He still got less minutes than an average starter would in a singular season. So if you start to compare those kind of numbers to what a starter would output, then these numbers start to look a little bit better, especially for a winger. Also, it's not the fact that he's even making appearances at all at the age of 17, 18, 19 for Bayern Munich, I think is something to be happy with rather than something to necessarily be worried about, because it's Bayern Munich. They're one of the best clubs in the world. They bring in a lot of great talent, including Harry Kane. And when you've got players like Kane, Sané, Gnabry, you can't expect a 19-year-old to be forcing them out of the starting lineup. And if they were, there would be no chance we would be able to touch him. So I do think that I can understand if you're a little bit reticent that he isn't a full-time starter at Bayern yet, but I don't think that's necessarily cause for concern. I think this is actually the fact that he's leaving shows something that I think is good. That shows that he has the drive to want to play those first team minutes that he just can't get at Bayern right now. And
it sounds like it's as much the player saying, I don't care if you want me. I want minutes now. It's a key part of my development. And hey, I'm playing for Bayern Munich, one of the top 5 football clubs in world football. I'm not getting enough minutes. But if I went to the 8th or 9th biggest club in the world, I'm going to get more minutes and still be playing at an elite level. And then we get the benefit when he hits that peak kind of age. And we still get an immediate benefit too. He's clearly going to offer more pace and energy than 32-year-old Sonny is, even though he's a brilliant player. And he's going to offer something very different to Brennan Johnson on the right. But let's get his player profile up now as well, because I think it's interesting to understand what type of player he is. And these statistics look kind of familiar with another player of Spurs, right?
Yeah. So the first thing, obviously, when Tottenham signed with I know about Mathys Tel. We'll get to that one a little bit later. But when we first got linked with Mathys Tel, obviously, he is a player that I have known about for a while. Not to flex or anything, but he was like when we were dealing with the Harry Kane deal. I think I said it on a couple of podcasts. I said if we can get Mathys Tel back in that deal, it would make it sting less. But yeah, if you don't know a lot about a player, the best thing I think you can do is go and look at their stat sheet, go look at their football reference. And from here we can kind of begin to get a general picture of what Mathys Tel is good at and what Mathys Tel is not good at. And the first thing you can see when you look at that little chart over there is you see that he's in the 99th percentile of aerials 1 against and face for attacking midfielders. and that's really good. It shows that he has that kind of physicality. He's a bigger build than maybe your average winger, which allows for him to get up and get those balls that when he's playing against wingbacks. Some people might use that as a reason to say, oh, he should definitely be a 9 in the future. But you have to remember that these numbers are him going up against the shorter
Mm,
wingbacks rather than the center backs who are generally
true.
playing on the number 9s like Harry Kane. So there's a little bit of context needed with that. Also, percentage of dribblers tackled. Um, that just shows that that's like not too big of a deal, honestly. That's on that I would say that that's mostly looking at the when he goes into a tackle, he's going to win it. He doesn't throw in a bunch of silly challenges, which I think is a good
And
thing
that's important with a high
for a
press, right?
player to have.
Because
Yes.
we need to have players that can effectively tackle in the final third. So if
Yeah.
he's able to offer that value in a high press for Postecoglou, that definitely fits the profile of one of his players.
Yes. And then if we look over to the left here, you've got your non-penalty goals. Looks pretty good per 90. Obviously not necessarily maybe elite, but above average. That's pretty good, especially considering we're comparing against every player in the top 5 leagues. And he's 19. I'm going to
Mm.
repeat that several more times throughout the course of this because it is important to remember that this isn't a finished product. We're not buying someone at the peak of their powers. Um, because I think if we bought a player like this at the peak of his powers, I don't think we could necessarily afford him. Or well, we could afford him. We wouldn't buy him. But that's a topic for another day. But yeah, you can see he gets a lot of shots off. His pass completion percentage is pretty good. His progressive passes received is good. That means he's getting himself into good positions. His successful take-ons are high. And yeah, the aerial duels we mentioned before. So those are kind of his best things. So what do the stats say he's weak at now? They say he's weak at shot creating actions, progressive passes, blocks. The defensive stats I would say, don't matter as much because of in the same
Yeah.
way that stats don't matter. Didn't matter that much with Dibbling. Um, Defensive stats don't matter as much when you're playing against a team that um, always has the ball. So you're not going to have to make a lot of blocks and tackles per 90, especially considering the game state that Tell comes on in a lot is when they're already kind of ahead. They're coasting
Killer game
along.
kind of thing, kind of
Yeah,
mode.
he's on to kill a
Foot's off the
game
gas.
to let the
Yeah.
foot off the gas, especially this season. Last season he was in a bit more. So but yeah, this season, especially in his recent matches, it's been like when he's subbing in a 3-0 against Hoffenheim
Would
or
Dude,
uh
is it fair to say though he's Heung-min Son's heir? Is that his role going to be? Is he going to be stepping in? Because there's been a lot of comparisons to Son. Is that because his predominant position is the left wing, where Son is currently? Is he here to offer that rotation option now across the front three? But also, in the inevitable happens, and Son has to be moved on with his age, be it a year or 2 years or 3 years, whatever it is. Is that why you think that's his home in that position? When you look at the stats, there's a lot of overlap between how they play, right?
yeah, I think it's hard to compare a player. It's hard to do to have stats tell the story of why I think Sun and Tell are the same, because if you look at these, they're similar in some areas, but there are some areas where they're pretty different. For example, Sun obviously isn't the best with aerial duels, and we've known this for a bit. But Intel is good, and then we've got Sun's non-penalty expected goals plus expected assists are better than Tel's. But that's also partially due to the fact that Sun is still acting as kind of the metronome of this team. So obviously the ball goes through him more. So of course he's gonna have more, like he's gonna create more expected goals, expected assists, whatnot. I think if you want to compare the two, you're comparing them based on like their stature, their player profile. Both of them are ambidextrous, so they can go both. They can dribble. They can take a player both sides. Both of them have very powerful shots. Both of them, I would say, for both of them, one of their greatest strengths. For Son's, obviously, his greatest strength by far is his ability to finish. And Tell's one of his biggest abilities, from what I saw, was his ability to generate power behind a shot. Um, and yeah, so I think he's definitely a player that if you go back and look at 18-year-old Son and look at his stats, unfortunately I can't pull up like Hamburg uh did not have time to go watch 18-year-old son play 20 minutes at Hamburg. But if you look at the stats when he was younger, the stats look sort of similar to the stats that Tel are putting up right now, even though we don't really have access to some
I was
of
going to,
the more advanced stats that we are judging him on
yeah.
today.
Well, I was just going to get the match logs from when he was a lot younger here and see if we could put a bit of a comparison in place. But I don't think the old data files and logs go back that far of the level of data we need. But look, it was a great summary of the player. I think it's one we can all massively get behind. It's a player that, like you said, if we leave it another year or two and he hits his potential, even in that year or two, he's going to a PSG, he's going to a Man City, he's going to a Liverpool. So
He's staying at
we need to
Bayern.
get him now, and
Yeah,
he's going to add invaluable depth.
Yeah, I want to touch on something you said there, and you said that if we get him when he hits his peak, we can't. And I think that that's important, and I think that it's important to remember that we are once again signing a 19-year-old. This is not a finished product. We are not signing. When I say that this guy reminds me of Son, I'm not saying that this guy is Son right now, and we can replace Son and he'll step right into the first team. There are still issues with his game that he does need to solve. One of which I don't think he's necessarily physical enough. A lot of the time I saw him, especially when he was going up against maybe like a CDM or a center back, he would get bullied off the ball a little bit too easily for my liking, especially given the stature that he has, that he needs to be able to learn to use his body to be a bit more effective in maintaining the ball. And that's, I think, probably his biggest blocker to being a 9 versus a winger. He also, his first touch, good, not great. He does miscontrol the ball a little bit too much for my liking, especially when he's like, the ball tends to like pop up on him a little bit, which is fixable, but isn't
That comes with
necessarily.
experience, though, and
Yeah, exactly.
time.
It's not something you can't expect a 19-year-old to be good at everything. If they were, they would be Galactico at this point. So
Maybe he will
they're
be. So he's
maybe
playing at the Spurnabout now, Deej.
the Spurnabout. Yes, but to assuage, I guess, some of the fears about him that I just brought up, I guess, once he does have the ball under control, he looks really comfortable on it. He's the kind of player that if when he has the ball and he's dribbling, it's like the ball's not even there. He's just kind of running and the ball is just going with him. I don't know if you know what I mean, but like he's the type of player that puts the ball under his spell and makes it look effortless while doing it. And I think that that's a kind of player that we need. He also, I think, his biggest strength that I haven't mentioned yet is his crossing, and that doesn't show up in the stats, and that's why I think it's important to go and like watch these games because he doesn't. I watched 2 games last night that really stuck out to me. His 2 most recent games, and both times he got one of the games against Hoffenheim. He got a brilliant assist from a cross was put in the perfect position, and then like 3 or 4 minutes later, he had a couple more crosses that just like they were just perfect. There's just the kind of ball that you see and you're like, that's a Richarlison ball, or that's a, Solanke would do so much with that. And it's the kind of ball that we really only get from one player right now, and that's Pedro Porro. And just having other players who can do that, like Tel, would be really, really nice. While he doesn't have many shot creating actions, like I said, I think that's due to him putting in crosses and no one getting on the end of it. So there's no shot being made, no shots being created. But there's like a chance for a shot that, like, honestly, I think should be taken more often than they were. He does the thing that apparent Ange has told our players, where your job is to put the ball where it's supposed to be. If the players aren't there, that's on them. He had a couple where he flashed the ball across goal, and like the winger on the other side or Kane weren't ready for him to be there, but they probably should have been. So that's why I'm saying, like, even like his strengths are places that he can only get better in, and even some of his statistical weaknesses need a little bit of context. And I think that's why we actually I watch him play instead of just checking Football Reference and calling it a day.
Stats only tell so much. It's like taking a chapter out of a book without the full context of the book. It's like they help tell a story, but you need the full picture. But thank you so much. Go on.
One more thing. After saying that his weakness is actually a strength, I'm gonna say that one of his strengths that I mentioned earlier might be a little bit more of not necessarily a weakness, but not as overly impressive as it was. I think that his dual win percentage I think was like really, really high, especially per 90, and that's partially because he will square up a defender a lot, but then use the quick use like a good layoff, and I think like a an easy layoff, and I think that's what's creating that successful take ons per 90 and his pass completion percentage
Hmm.
being as low as high as they are. His pass completion percentage, but progressive passes being low, kind of tells the story for you. He isn't doing a lot of incisive passes. A lot of it is him doing the dump off back to like Davies or whoever's playing behind him in the midfield, or even like center back like Eric Dyer. Um, but he does still possess that ability. His long balls, he's got good shape on them, but they're a little bit inconsistent in where they go. Um, but that's not to say that he doesn't take on his man ever, and he doesn't, like I said, he doesn't try to play that killer ball because I think a lot of it ends up being qualified as crosses. Um, and I think I would say that it's actually a good thing that he's more picky in his duels because it means that he's only taking them on when he thinks he has a chance to win, and he's not
Mm.
overly forcing a duel that he is just going to go in and lose the ball in. So I think it's a really good skill I think to have, to know when you need to recycle the ball, and that kind of maturity isn't necessarily something you always find in players as young as he is.
Yeah. Cool. So it sounds like to me, Deej, we can get excited by it. Just don't expect a perfectly polished item. Expect a
He's not
really
going to win the Ballon
exciting.
d'Or this season, I promise.
He'll get
But
you off your seat. He will cross the ball beautifully. He will pop up with goals. He will contribute in the high press. And he is a better mould for Ange Ball in that front three than probably anyone else we have. So, an ideal signing. He's exciting. He's here. He's at the Spurnabow. Welcome, Mathys Tel. Thank you so much, Deej, for the research, and up the Spurs.
come on, you Spurs.